that shocking trade to another? Well, maybe. Here's what's trending on social media. Trevor Lawrence. Why? Because 4 days after the Super Bowl, the strange needs to get stirred up. The Steelers' quarterback situation is uncertain. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are free agents. Could they pull off a trade for Trevor Lawrence? Is that in Mike Tomlin's first 15 plays? Well, live look at our Pete Prisco. That's going to be a no for him, dog. In fact, he doesn't even want to look at it, shielding his eyes. It's a good look for Pete, saying absolutely not going to happen.
He loves Trevor Lawrence.
Jaguars would not. We do know big moves will be made this offseason, though. So let's bring in our NFL writers, Breech, Will Brinson. All right, guys. Aaron Rodgers is a name now that we'll talk even more about, believe it or not, somehow, because he will be on the open market after the Jets officially part ways for him come middle of March. So where is the best landing spot for Rodgers if he continues to play?
Well, I'll say, I think there's two landing spots I'll give out. I didn't tell producer Noah that I was going to give to, but he also didn't tell me he was going to put sunglasses on Pete Prisco and force me to screenshot it and totally throw me for a loop right before the segment started. I'll say that the Steelers should go ahead and make a call here because you have Rodgers, who's been bitter, about how things went with the Jets. You can go and play for a good coach in Mike Tomlin. You can get a good defense to back you up. And I think you can make the case that the Steelers add a piece or two in the receiver room. Maybe they are actually a quarterback away from winning. They just didn't get the quarterback play they needed from Russell Wilson down the stretch. But the really fun landing spot for Aaron Rodgers would be the Minnesota Vikings. Let's all be real. If he follows the exact same path as Brett Favre, it would be beyond hilarious. And he would, have to continue those McAfee hits every week because Vikings fans would tune in just for the Schadenfreude.
Boy, who would Packers fans hate more seeing in purple, Rodgers or Favre? That was a tough situation when Favre was playing QB in Minnesota. All right, John, another quarterback now a year removed from an Achilles injury, Kirk Cousins. He will be a free agent. We know that Atlanta will avoid keeping him on the roster for that bonus coming up in March. Where does Kirk go?
Yeah, Brinson and I just sending the Achilles injuries to the AFC North because I have Kirk Cousins going to the Cleveland Browns. Look, he has a history with Kevin Stefanski. They were in Minnesota together. Kirk Cousins, obviously the quarterback. Stefanski was the offensive coordinator at the time. And if you look at Kevin Stefanski's offense, it actually works when the quarterback understands how to run it. We saw Jameis Winston thrive in that offense. We saw Joe Flacco lead the Cleveland Browns to the playoffs running that offense. And with Deshaun Watson almost certainly done in Cleveland, Kirk Cousins, you bring in someone who's familiar with the system. You don't have to really teach it to him. And with a quarterback like that, there's no reason the Browns can't turn things around and finish above 500 next season. And the other thing is, he might be willing to take that Russell Wilson deal that we saw Russell take with the Steelers last season, where he's got so much money coming from the Falcons that he can sign that league minimum deal with Cleveland. So I think it could be a smart financial signing and smart for Kirk because he already knows the head coach so well.
Yeah, it's not a bad place to be as a player or a team with all that money still carrying over from the year before. All right, Will, if, let's say, Rodgers goes to Pittsburgh or they choose not to bring Russell Wilson back, were things rosy enough with a former coach that the Raiders make sense?
Chris, I'm so glad that you're teeing us up for all of these because, quite frankly, the only thing in my brain right now is that picture of Pete Prisco. Like, I can't get it out of my head. Yeah, look, Pete Carroll's in Las Vegas now. You have Tom Brady, who's heavily involved in owning the team. You're trying to get some sort of sense of stability and to bring in this compete mantra. And you look at the quarterbacks that they have or had in the room, and, I mean, it's just not that impressive. It was clearly the biggest downfall for the Raiders, along with like a lot of other issues on defense and with the run game, every which way. Really, Carroll is he's an adult in the room. Quite frankly, he and Russell have mended fences. They're back to being buddies again. Well, I don't think Russ, at this stage of his career, is someone who's going to come in and wing the ball around and be an incredible quarterback. I do think he can manage a game and sort of go back to being what he was for Pete Carroll when he started in the NFL. He's also just a perfect bridge quarterback, and I just kind of like the idea of Russ in the silver and black, pointing over, like looking over at Pete Carroll, pointing like that, with Pete's like chomping his gum in a Raiders pullover. The idea is kind of intriguing to me.
Okay. Detroit has been linked here, John, to maybe going after Myles Garrett if Cleveland were to make him available. But there's another pass rusher who's known for his motor that maybe makes better sense in Detroit.
Yeah, Brinson was just talking about the Raiders, so let's talk about the Raiders and Max Crosby. Look, if you're Pete Carroll, you're signing Russell Wilson, maybe you're thinking about, maybe you need some draft picks. You're rebuilding a little bit. You ship Max Crosby off to Detroit, who should be calling around, whether it is Myles Garrett, whether it is Max Crosby. You need a pass rusher in there, because you look at when the Lions defense really started to fall apart last season, it was in week 5 when Aiden Hutchinson got injured. And you look at that, Aiden Hutchinson only played 5 games in 2024. He led that team in sacks. He had as many sacks, 7.5, as the next 2 players on the team combined. And that was even though he missed 12 games. And so once the Lions couldn't rush the passer, they couldn't stop the pass. They gave up the 3rd most passing yards. So they need some help up front. Putting Aiden Hutchinson and Max Crosby on that same line would be scary, and it would make the Lions a Super Bowl contender. They're already a Super Bowl contender, but put them over the top.
All right, the team that knocked the Lions out of the playoffs, Will, the Washington Commanders, and the conversation now is, how do we get pieces around Jaden Daniels? What should the Commanders do?
Well, I mean, I think T. Higgins could be an option for the Commanders. I personally think the Panthers should go out and sign him, but T. Higgins is going to be a highly coveted free agent. And if I'm somebody who needs some more help at wide receiver and I want to improve, around a young quarterback, whether it be Jaden Daniels or whether it be Bryce Young, and I've got cap space to burn, I'm going out and giving T. Higgins money. Now, I don't know that T. Higgins is necessarily like a true number 1, but maybe he's a low-end number 1 or a really good number 2, and then you can sort of keep drafting. I think he and Terry McLaurin would pair nice with each other, and then maybe you develop Xavier Legette. Jalen Coker played well in Carolina, and you bring in T. Higgins, it just opens things up a lot more. I know it's a little unnervy to give a free agent wide receiver a huge contract, but I think Higgins, just because Breech's Bengals are so freaking cheap, is going to end up being a pretty good player who hits the open market, because normally he'd be signed by a regularly average thinking team, but the Bengals aren't regular and average. They're frugal and cheap.
All right, so Will, you've got T to Carolina to help out Bryce Young. John, how about in Washington? Deebo Samuel says he wants to trade out of San Francisco. Is he a fit?
Yeah, I feel like the Commanders need to call up the 49ers and say, hey, look, we read the news. We know Deebo wants out. And if you look at what the Commanders have on offense, you have a quarterback on a rookie deal. So you need to do whatever you can to build around that. And while he is still cheap, you know they have Terry McLaurin, so they have a number 1 receiver. But Deebo doesn't need to be a number 1 receiver. He can be a number 2 guy, but he's so versatile that he can do multiple things out of the backfield. And someone who would be really good at taking advantage of that is Cliff Kingsbury. He showed as the offensive coordinator in 2024 that he's creative. He was doing new things with that Commanders offense. People had trouble stopping it. So you throw Deebo Samuel in there, it's kind of this X-factor wild card. I think that the Commanders offense could take another step forward. So it went from good in 2024 to maybe great. So they need to get a number 2 guy in there, and I think Deebo Samuel will be a good fit.
4 days removed from the Super Bowl, never too soon to start looking ahead to what might happen when free agency opens up. Will Brinson, John Breech with us here on CBS Sports HQ. Gentlemen, thank you. You don't need me to tell you the NFL never takes a break. There is no offseason, but I will tell you that for all your NFL content, we've got it here for you. CBS Sports HQ, all your news, highlights, and scores.